This is Knowing the Universe, the History and Philosophy of Astronomy. I'm Chris Impey, Distinguished Professor at the University of Arizona in the Astronomy Department. And in this module, we're going to look at Greek science, the origins of science over 2,000 years ago, and the way that we learn about the natural world. We can summarize the situation by looking at these two very different views of life on the universe from 2,000 years ago. On the one hand, we have Epicurus in his letter to Herodotus saying, "There are infinite worlds both like and unlike this world of ours. We must believe that in all worlds there are living creatures and plants and other things that we see on this world." In contrast, we have Aristotle, who says declaratively, "The world must be unique. There cannot be several worlds." This, in a nutshell, is the many worlds idea, whether the Earth is unique or not. And see how we have such a large disagreement over 2,000 years ago, when in truth there's no evidence to decide between the two propositions. But interestingly enough, in the history of science, everything starts pretty much at this one place and this one time about 2,500 years ago.
More than 25 centuries ago, among the Greek islands, here at the vibrant crossroads of Africa, Asia, and Europe, philosophers began to devise rational theories about the world around them. The wondrous ways and forms of nature, they said, could be understood. One Greek thinker suggested that the Earth actually moved around the sun. Another taught that everything, the work of man and nature, was made of particles.
And so, we have the ancient Greeks. They had a strong civic society, yet no technology that we're familiar with. And somehow, in a short period of time, just a couple of hundred years, this set of small thinkers and philosophers came up with the foundations of philosophy, logic, and the scientific method. They invented systems of government law and the city-state that we still depend on today. They were creative in the arts and developed new ideas of theater, music, and medicine, also some of which are still in use today. They invented from scratch mathematics, geometry, algebra, the concept of infinity, and even irrational numbers. And they had, far ahead of their time, ideas of the round Earth and a heliocentric universe. That's pretty impressive. And the question comes, why does modern science trace its roots to the ancient Greeks? And what's special about these people and what they did? Well, the Greeks were the first people known to make models of nature. They tried to explain patterns in nature without resorting to myths or the supernatural. In other words, they were doing natural science, and they applied math and logic to explanations of phenomena they saw in the world. They were also the first people to deploy evidence to argue something. They used evidence from naked eye observations of the sky. Of course, telescopes would not be invented for 2,000 years. This is the origination place. The civilizations of the Middle East, Mesopotamia, Egypt, which eventually moved towards Greece and Turkey. This part of Asia Minor was a hotbed of civilization and ideas, trade and travel, 4,000 years ago, and that continued for millennia. In a brief history of the Greek time, we can look at the earliest writings, Homer's Iliad and the Odyssey, and Hesiod's Theogony and Works and Days. These were written around 400 BC, 700 BC, and these essentially were poetic works designed to be memorized, 20 or 30,000 lines that were passed on verbally as an oral tradition, because printed books were essentially unknown in that time. Homer especially talks of an even earlier age, the late Bronze Age of Mycenaean civilization, the age of Odysseus and Achilles, and many familiar legends. Around 1200 BC, the Mycenaean and Hittite civilizations began to fail. We don't exactly know why. There was evidence of environmental degradation and perhaps climate change, and the literacy was lost in a few hundred years, with little later evidence of what happened. This is what the place looked like, that part of the Mediterranean. Still, many of the relics are around, many of the ruins are there. It's a wonderful place to visit, to do tourism about the birth of philosophy. In the history, we continue into the Archaic period, the time of Homer and Hesiod, when the Greeks immigrated throughout Asia Minor and spread in colonies as far as Spain and North Africa. This was the emergence of the first city-states, the dominance of Sparta, Athens, Corinth, and Thebes, sometimes competing and at war with each other, sometimes collaborating, always trading with each other. So the rise of mercantilism, coins, and democracy can trace its back time to Athens. The classical Greek period runs from about 500 to 300 BC. The Ionian Greeks rebelled against the Persians, and there was 50 years of fighting the Persians. After this peace, the golden age of Athens emerged, the age of Pericles, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. We have the rise of Macedonia under Philip II, who conquered most of the Greek city-states by 330 BC. And in Hellenistic Greek, Alexander the Great takes power at the tender age of 20 in 336. He dies in Babylon in the year 323, and his empire is divided up amongst his generals. Eventually, Rome conquers all of these in the next 100 years, and this marks the end of the freewheeling Greek experiment. Here's a look at Greece and Asia Minor and the Persian Empire around this time. And this at the larger world and the empire of Alexander the Great, the largest empire known for millennia. Archaic Greeks, in spite of their mercantile success, seemed to have a more abstract view of the world. Babylonian astronomers made measurements and kept a good calendar, but they were judged by their predictive accuracy. They didn't seem to delve into the meaning of things. Whereas Greek philosophers were more concerned about the true nature of things. Was a model for the universe true? We think these are the first people that asked such a question. Greek philosophy increasingly was divorced from religious or mythological beliefs. The gods themselves became more abstract, although they were still important in everyday life and for most people. The classical Greeks developed a geometric methods and a model of the cosmos they lived in. They assumed that the universe was an orderly system running according to natural laws, which could be accessible to human thought. This idea is encapsulated by the word logos, meaning reasoned discourse, i.e., logic. But in a spiritual sense, the idea of active reason would pervade and animate the universe. So this is not some sterile, abstract concept. This is an animating force, almost like a deity itself. If we get to what they knew about the sky, this is the starting point for their philosophy that would lead them to understand nature. The average educated Greek knew that the earth was a sphere, was aware of the daily motion of the celestial sphere and the stars, knew that the stars didn't change their relative positions, and that the annual motion of the sun with respect to stars would repeat on a seasonal cycle. They were well familiar with the moon's motion and the phases of the moon with respect to the fixed stars, and they knew that the planets' motions were a little strange or unusual, in the sense that they moved among the pattern of the stars at an irregular rate, and some of those planets even reversed their motion episodically. Let's get familiar, before we start getting into what the Greeks actually learned or thought, with the majesty of the night sky, as anyone in an ancient civilization would be able to experience it. And that's the end of this topic.